targeted therapies have been around more than a decade, and we've made a lot of progress kind of inching forward one target at a time with often very big benefits. There were a few studies, nothing huge, but studies in BRAF as a target, RET, MET, exon 14. So I would just open with the question, what do you see as the emerging actionable targets for the next 6, 12 months or so on that horizon that could really change how we practice and deliver more patients into the prognosis of years instead of limited to months or several or a year or so?
Well, I don't know. The genetic medicine has taken a bit of a step back with the excitement for immune therapies that have come up, and yet the field is totally not fully developed yet, right? There is much to come still. There was an interesting paper in head and neck cancer that looked at a PI3K inhibitor, but did not select patients, so it just added it to paclitaxel in that case. And it was a smaller study, but it suggested, and it's a squamous tumor, a progression-free survival benefit.
Mm-hmm.
So that's not used as targeted therapy, but it's a potential targeted therapy. So I think PI3K is still there. There's RET, there's HER2. But beyond that,
and track one.
Yes, and so there is a list. And it goes back to blood testing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And seeing what else is there and what do we have drugs for. And they may be drugs initially planned for a certain mutation. They may be drugs, such as initially crizotinib, aimed at testing, at hitting something else, right? It was aimed at MET, but hit ALK,
Mm-hmm.
and therefore was present when needed and could be developed. So I wouldn't necessarily have a long list right now in my head of the targets for the next year or two.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think that clever matching of genetic information with what we know about an increasingly larger pool of drugs will help us forward.
Ram, what do you think here?
So in addition to what Everett just mentioned, I would say at this meeting, a couple of things that intrigued me was the presentation on patients with BRAF mutation positive lung cancer. This is another mutation that happens in about 1 to 2% of the patients, and the specific V600E mutation is what this study looked at. And for them, the combination of two drugs, dabrafenib and trametinib, these are two drugs used in melanoma patients who have the same mutation.
Mm-hmm.
And when these patients received these two drugs, the response rate was nearly 65%, and the median progression-free survival was approximately 9.5, 10 months, which is similar to what we see with crizotinib
Mm-hmm.
in ALK-positive patients. And this combination is now in review, or at least is likely to get approval at some point, as I understand, because it has a breakthrough status with the FDA. So I think that the BRAF population could be another target that will get added to the list. So we already have EGFR, ALK, and ROS, where there are approved agents. Now if you add BRAF and potentially MET exon 14 mutations, that's seen in about 3%. We saw additional analysis from groups looking at their tumor banks at this meeting to see what's the true prevalence of the exon 14 MET mutation, and that seems to be about 3%. And for those patients, Xalkori might be a promising option. We saw some interesting information on another study that was reported. So I think we're seeing the number of targets that can be matched with drugs in lung cancer grow. And even though these are individually small pieces of the pie, if you add them all up, we're seeing a substantial number of lung patients who would benefit from targeted agents.
So we may have, as broader molecular testing is done, it may lead to a marked increase in the number of patients known to have not just targets we know have therapies, but targets that are being studied, but potentially in a very limited way.